Pause for a moment. Not just physically, internally. Whatever you were doing before this can wait. Not because this is dramatic, not because I want your attention for entertainment, but because moments like this don't repeat themselves easily. Something precise is happening right now, and if you rush past it, you'll feel it later as a strange sense of, I almost understood something important. This isn't background noise. This isn't motivation to multitask through. You didn't stumble into this message. You didn't land here by accident. There are too many tiny alignments stacked together for that. The timing, your mood, the way your chest tightened when the words began, the way something in you said, wait. That wasn't curiosity. That was recognition. You've been carrying more than you let on. Not in a dramatic way. Quietly. The kind of weight that doesn't show on your face, but sits behind your eyes. The kind that makes you sigh when no one's around. The kind that shows up at night, when the noise finally stops and your thoughts get loud. You've been asking questions you don't always say out loud. Questions about direction. About whether your life is actually aligned or just busy. About whether you're building something meaningful or simply surviving the days as they come. And here's what you need to hear first. Before anything else, you are not confused because you're lost. You're unsettled because you're waking up. There's a difference. Confusion comes from lack of direction. Awakening comes from realizing the direction you've been moving in is no longer enough. That's why familiar things suddenly feel hollow. That's why achievements that once motivated you don't hit the same. That's why conversations that used to excite you now feel shallow. Your spirit is no longer satisfied with surface-level living. You've probably tried to explain this feeling to yourself logically. Maybe you told yourself you're just tired, or burned out, or ungrateful. Maybe you wondered if something was wrong with you for feeling restless when your life looks fine from the outside. But nothing is wrong with you. Something is right. Long before you had language for faith or purpose or calling, there was already something different about the way you moved through the world. You noticed things other people ignored. You felt things more deeply. You asked questions that didn't have easy answers. You sensed meaning where others saw coincidence. That wasn't personality. That was memory. Not memory of events, but memory of origin. There's a part of you that remembers you weren't created randomly. That you weren't designed just to blend in, earn a living, and disappear quietly. That part of you has been patient, waiting for the moment when your outer life would finally slow down enough for your inner life to speak. That moment is now. You've been searching for purpose without realizing it. Not in obvious ways. Not necessarily through religion or big life decisions. But through restlessness, through dissatisfaction, through that constant internal sense that you're meant for something more aligned, more intentional, more real. And here's where most people get it wrong. Purpose is not a role. It's not a title. It's not a destination you arrive at someday when everything finally makes sense. Purpose is a way of being. You were never created just to do things. You were created to carry something. A presence, a way of seeing, a way of responding, a way of moving through pressure without losing your center. That's why your life hasn't followed a simple, predictable path. You've faced resistance that didn't match your circumstances. You've felt misunderstood, even when you were doing nothing wrong. You've experienced delays that didn't make sense logically. You've outgrown people, places, and habits faster than expected, and then felt guilty about it. That wasn't bad luck. That was shaping. Pressure doesn't arrive randomly. Pressure reveals capacity. And every season that felt unnecessarily heavy was strengthening something in you that couldn't be developed any other way. Think about it. You didn't just endure those seasons, you learned discernment. You didn't just survive those disappointments, you developed depth. You didn't just lose things, you gained clarity about what actually matters. Most people numb themselves when life gets uncomfortable. You didn't. Even when you tried to distract yourself, something inside you refused to fully shut down. That refusal wasn't stubbornness. It was integrity at the soul level. You weren't built to go unconscious. That's why chasing approval never worked for you for long. Compliments felt good for a moment, but they never settled the deeper hunger. Applause faded quickly. Validation never lasted, because you weren't created to be fueled by external affirmation. Your spirit is designed to respond to alignment, not attention. And the more you tried to measure yourself by other people's expectations, the more drained you felt. The more you tried to fit into definitions of success that weren't yours, the heavier life became. That wasn't failure. That was your inner compass refusing to recalibrate. Right now, something inside you is asking for coherence, for your inner values and outer actions to finally match, for your time, energy, and attention to reflect what you actually believe, rather than what you've been told to chase. This is why certain doors closed even when you wanted them to open. Why some relationships faded even when you tried to hold them together. Why opportunities you thought you needed dissolved before they could fully form. You weren't being denied. You were being redirected. Redirection doesn't feel gentle when you're attached to the plan you made. It feels like loss, like delay, like confusion. But redirection is one of the clearest signs that your life is being actively guided rather than left to chance. And guidance always intensifies right before alignment. You're at the edge of that alignment now. That's why you're more sensitive lately. Music hits differently. Silence feels louder. Small moments carry more weight. You notice beauty more easily, and injustice more sharply. Your tolerance for pretending has dropped dramatically. You can't fake enthusiasm anymore. You can't ignore what feels off. You can't participate in things that drain your integrity just to keep the peace. That isn't arrogance. That's discernment coming online. Discernment isn't loud. It's quiet and firm. It doesn't argue, it withdraws. It doesn't attack, it disengages. And when it activates, it changes how you move without needing to explain why. This shift can feel lonely at first. When you stop operating on autopilot, fewer people can walk beside you comfortably. When your inner world deepens, surface-level connections naturally loosen. That doesn't mean you're meant to be alone forever. It means you're transitioning. Incubation always comes before expansion. Nothing that grows with integrity is rushed into visibility. Strength is built privately before it's trusted publicly. And right now, a lot of your growth is happening where no one is applauding. That doesn't mean it isn't working. It means it's real. You're not behind, you're not late, you're not missing your moment. You're being prepared for a version of life that requires stability, clarity, and depth. not impulse and performance. And the reason this message feels personal is because it is. Not in a mystical way that removes your responsibility, but in a grounded way that invites you to participate consciously. You're being invited to stop chasing definitions of success that exhaust you and start responding to what brings coherence to your life. Alignment doesn't shout, it resonates. And if something in you feels calmer, even as these words challenge you, that's your confirmation. Truth doesn't always feel comfortable, but it feels steady. This is the beginning of remembering, not who you want to become, but who you've been slowly uncovering all along. And this is only the first layer. There is a moment in every chosen life where silence becomes louder than noise, where the prayers feel unanswered, and where heaven seems distant even though you know, deep down, that God is still present. This is the season most people misunderstand. They assume something has gone wrong. They assume delay means denial. They assume struggle means abandonment. But this is not a season of absence. This is a season of formation. God does his deepest work when he removes the crowd. When everything around you becomes quiet, when support thins out, when familiar voices disappear, it is not punishment, it is positioning. God is separating your spirit from dependency, from external validation, from the need to be understood by people who were never meant to walk into your next season. This is where identity is no longer borrowed, but forged. You start noticing that old patterns don't comfort you anymore. Conversations that once felt safe now feel shallow. Even blessings you prayed for in the past no longer satisfy you the same way. That's because God is expanding your spiritual capacity. He is stretching your inner world to match the assignment he placed on your life long before you were born. This is why rest feels temporary. You may get brief moments of peace, brief breakthroughs, brief encouragement, but then the pressure returns. Not because God is cruel, but because he is intentional. Strength is not built in comfort. Authority is not developed in ease. Calling is not activated in applause. The anointing that lasts is shaped under weight. Scripture shows us this pattern again and again. Moses was hidden before he was sent. David was isolated before he was crowned. Jesus was led into the wilderness before he began his ministry. The wilderness is not a detour, it is a requirement. What makes this phase so difficult is that you are growing internally faster than your external life can reflect. Your spirit is maturing, but your environment hasn't caught up yet. You can feel the shift inside, but nothing around you confirms it. That gap creates frustration. It creates loneliness. It creates moments where you question yourself, not because you lack faith, but because faith is being refined. God is teaching you how to stand without leaning. You are learning how to hear his voice without constant reassurance. You are learning how to obey without applause. You are learning how to remain steady when emotions fluctuate. This is spiritual muscle being built slowly, deliberately, and invisibly. Many people quit here. They misinterpret pressure as a sign to retreat. They confuse discomfort with danger. But what if this tension is evidence that something powerful is being prepared within you? What if the very thing making you uncomfortable is the proof that you are evolving beyond who you used to be? There is also a purification happening. God is gently, but firmly, removing attachments that would contaminate your next level. Certain desires lose their grip. Certain temptations no longer excite you. Certain relationships begin to feel misaligned. This isn't loss. It's discernment developing. You're not becoming cold, you're becoming clear. Clarity costs something. It costs illusion. It costs false belonging. It costs versions of yourself that could survive, but not lead. And leadership, whether visible or hidden, requires inner alignment. God is not just preparing you to receive blessings, He is preparing you to steward them. Many people receive more than they can handle, and it destroys them. God will not allow that with you. That's why the growth feels slow. That's why progress feels uneven. That's why the road feels longer than expected. You are being trained to carry weight without collapsing. This season also exposes internal resistance. Old fears surface, old insecurities whisper. Doubt tries to reintroduce itself, not because it belongs, but because it senses displacement. When light increases, darkness resists harder. That does not mean you are losing, it means the battle is shifting. You may notice that God is asking for obedience before explanation. Steps without clarity, trust without timelines, movement without guarantees. This is not random. God is transitioning you from logic-based faith to surrendered faith, from needing control to embracing trust, from asking, why, to saying, yes. And yes, this is uncomfortable. Faith was never meant to be convenient. It was meant to be transformational. There is also a deep emotional recalibration happening. You feel things more intensely. Joy is richer. Pain is sharper. Empathy deepens. Sensitivity increases. This is not weakness, it is spiritual perception sharpening. God is tuning your heart so you can sense what others ignore, feel what others suppress, and intercede where others remain silent. This sensitivity is not meant to overwhelm you. It is meant to guide you. But before God uses it outwardly, He teaches you how to manage it inwardly. How to stay grounded. How to regulate emotions without suppressing them. How to feel deeply without being controlled by feeling. This is maturity. This is why God allows misunderstanding. You will not be fully understood in this season, and that is intentional. If people understood you too soon, they would interfere with the process. Some would pull you back into familiarity. Others would try to shape you into something safer. God protects your becoming through obscurity. Hiddenness is not neglect, it is protection. There is also a spiritual authority being quietly established. Not the loud, performative kind, but the kind that carries presence. The kind that shifts atmospheres without announcing itself. The kind that speaks, and things settle. That authority is built when you choose obedience over comfort, when you choose prayer over panic, when you choose faith over familiarity. Heaven notices those choices, even when people don't. You may feel like progress is happening in reverse, like doors are closing instead of opening, like clarity is decreasing instead of increasing. But this is the stripping before the strengthening. God often removes external confirmation so that internal conviction can solidify. Conviction outlasts applause. When your identity is anchored in God rather than outcomes, you become unshakable. Circumstances lose their power to define you. Delay loses its ability to discourage you. Silence loses its ability to scare you. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, you begin to change. Your reactions soften. Your discernment sharpens. Your patience deepens. Your faith stabilizes. This is not accidental. This is you becoming someone who can carry purpose without losing yourself. You are not behind. You are not forgotten. You are not failing. You are being built in places no one can see yet. And when the time comes, when the doors open, when the calling becomes visible, when the impact becomes undeniable, you will look back on this season with reverence, not resentment. You will recognize it as sacred ground, the place where God shaped you quietly so you could stand boldly later. Stay here. Stay faithful. Stay open. He is not finished. He is preparing you. At some point, the pressure shifts. It no longer feels external. It feels internal. The battle is no longer about circumstances, people, or timing. It becomes about alignment. About whether who you are becoming can fully hold what God is preparing to release. This is the phase where many believers don't realize they've crossed into deeper territory, because nothing dramatic announces it. There is no trumpet sound, no obvious milestone, just a growing sense that you cannot return to who you used to be, even if you tried. This is where identity begins to stabilize, not because life suddenly gets easier, but because you stop negotiating with doubt the way you used to. You no longer panic every time something doesn't work out. You no longer spiral when clarity delays. You still feel uncertainty, but it doesn't own you. Something inside has rooted itself deeper than emotion. That root is trust, not blind optimism, not surface-level positivity, but a settled knowing that God is present even when the path is unclear. This kind of faith doesn't shout. It doesn't rush. It doesn't prove itself to others. It stands quietly and waits, fully aware that timing is not accidental. This is also where authority begins to replace anxiety. You start responding instead of reacting, observing instead of absorbing, discerning instead of assuming. The chaos that once pulled you into emotional turbulence now passes by without hooking you the same way. That doesn't mean you've become detached. It means you've become anchored. Anchored people don't need constant reassurance. Anchored people don't chase validation. Anchored people don't abandon themselves to be accepted. And this shift often confuses others. People who knew the old version of you may feel distance, not because you withdrew, but because you're no longer vibrating at the same frequency. You don't feed drama. You don't overshare. You don't explain yourself endlessly. You speak when necessary, stay silent when needed, and choose peace even when misunderstood. This silence is not weakness. It is restraint, and restraint is a mark of spiritual authority. God is teaching you how to carry power without needing to display it, how to walk in confidence without arrogance, how to be certain without becoming rigid. This balance is rare, and that's why the process is intense. There is also a sobering clarity that emerges in this phase. You begin to see people clearly, not through judgment, but through discernment. You recognize patterns. You notice motives. You understand dynamics that once confused you. And with that clarity comes grief. Not bitterness, but grief for illusions that can no longer survive truth. You grieve versions of relationships that were never real. You grieve expectations that were never aligned. You grieve timelines that belong to your ego, not God. This grief is holy. It clears space. And in that space, God begins to redefine purpose, not as something you chase, but as something you embody. Purpose stops feeling like a future destination and starts feeling like a present responsibility. You realize that who you are becoming matters more than what you are building. because impact flows from identity. This is also where obedience becomes less emotional and more instinctive. You don't need a dramatic sign for every step. You move when prompted. You pause when checked. You trust subtle nudges instead of demanding certainty. This sensitivity didn't come overnight. It was trained through all the seasons where you had to wait, listen, and surrender. Many people want clarity without intimacy, but clarity comes from closeness, and closeness requires time. God has been teaching you how to recognize His voice, not just in prayer, but in stillness. Not just in scripture, but in daily decisions. Not just in worship, but in restraint. This is mature faith, faith that integrates into life instead of existing only in moments. You may notice that temptations shift here. It's no longer about obvious distractions. It's about subtle compromises, about shortcuts that look efficient but dilute integrity, about opportunities that look good externally but feel wrong internally. This is where discernment is tested, not by evil, but by almost right options. And this is where many fall. But you are learning to wait for alignment, not just opportunity, to choose peace over progress, to value obedience over optics. These choices don't always make sense to others, but they make sense to heaven. There is also a refining of motivation happening. You begin to question why you want what you want, whether your desire is rooted in calling or comparison, whether your hunger is pure or reactive. God is not removing ambition, He is purifying it. He is aligning your desires with His design so that when doors open, you walk through them whole, not hollow. This is why God delays some breakthroughs. Not because you're unready externally, but because alignment internally takes time. A misaligned breakthrough can damage what years of preparation were meant to protect. So God slows you down. He deepens you. He grounds you. He steadies you. This season also teaches you how to self-regulate spiritually. You no longer need constant emotional highs to feel close to God. You learn how to remain faithful in ordinary days, how to show up consistently even when nothing exciting happens. This consistency is rare and powerful. God trusts people who are steady, steady in prayer, steady in character, steady in obedience. And trust precedes responsibility. You may not see it yet, but heaven is expanding your capacity quietly. You are becoming someone who can hold influence without losing humility, visibility without ego, authority without hardness. This kind of formation cannot be rushed. And yes, there are still moments of doubt. Moments where the weight feels heavy. Moments where silence feels loud. Moments where you wonder if you misheard God. But those moments no longer define you. They pass through you instead of overtaking you. That's growth. You're no longer fighting to become someone. You are settling into who God already said you are. Not perfectly, not completely, but genuinely. And that genuineness creates peace, a deep, grounded peace, the kind that doesn't depend on circumstances, the kind that remains even when plans shift, the kind that holds you steady while everything else evolves. This is not the end of the journey, but it is a turning point, from striving to trusting, from searching to stabilizing, from becoming to embodying. You are no longer being prepared only for what you will do. You are being prepared for how you will carry it. And that difference will define everything that comes next. Stay grounded, stay discerning, stay surrendered, What God is building now will support what He reveals later. And when the next season unfolds, you will step into it not rushed, not desperate, not uncertain, but rooted, clear, and ready. There comes a moment when the inner work stops feeling invisible. Not because everything suddenly changes on the outside, but because something inside finally settles into place. This is the phase where you no longer feel like you're waiting to become someone. You realize you already are. The striving quiets. The internal noise lowers. And what replaces it is a calm authority that doesn't need to announce itself. This is embodiment. You are no longer thinking about faith as a concept. You are living from it. Decisions don't feel forced anymore. Boundaries don't feel cruel. Obedience doesn't feel heavy. You move with clarity not because you control outcomes, but because you trust the one who does. Your identity stabilizes here. Not because you've achieved something impressive, but because you've stopped outsourcing your sense of worth. You no longer borrow confidence from praise or collapse under criticism. Compliments don't inflate you. Rejection doesn't erase you. You remain steady because your foundation is no longer emotional, it's anchored. Anchored in truth. Anchored in calling. Anchored in God. This is where spiritual authority matures. Authority isn't volume. It isn't dominance. It isn't visibility. Authority is presence. It's the way you enter rooms without trying to shift them, and they shift anyway. It's the way people listen when you speak. Not because you demand attention, but because your words carry weight. That weight comes from alignment, from integrity, from having walked through fire without losing your softness. You've learned how to hold both strength and gentleness. That balance is rare. Most people lean toward one extreme, either hardened by survival or weakened by fear. But God has been shaping you to carry firmness without harshness, compassion without compromise. This is the posture of someone trusted with influence. And influence is coming, not necessarily platform first, but responsibility. Responsibility over conversations. Responsibility over people. Responsibility over outcomes. You may already feel it, the subtle awareness that your words matter more now, that your reactions shape environments, that how you carry yourself sets tone. This isn't pressure, it's stewardship. God doesn't give authority suddenly. He reveals it gradually as character proves capable of holding it. This is also the phase where purpose shifts from abstract to actionable. It's no longer just something you pray about. It's something you practice. You begin to see where your presence makes things clearer, calmer, stronger. You recognize the problems you're naturally drawn to solve. The people you instinctively understand. The spaces where your discernment brings order instead of confusion. Purpose doesn't always arrive as a dramatic calling moment. Often, it reveals itself through consistency, through what you show up for even when no one notices, through what burdens you when others walk away, through what energizes you instead of draining you. God speaks through patterns. And now, you're finally paying attention. You stop asking, "What should I do with my life?" and start asking, "How am I meant to serve from who I am?" That shift changes everything, because now, you're no longer chasing purpose, you're activating it. Small steps become meaningful. Ordinary obedience carries eternal weight. You realize that faithfulness in the unseen is not preparation for impact, it is impact. This is also where your prayer life changes. You pray less from desperation and more from partnership. Less begging, more listening. Less explaining, more aligning. You don't feel the need to convince God, because you know He's already aware. Prayer becomes dialogue instead of monologue. Silence no longer scares you. You trust that God works even when He's quiet. There is also a strengthening of discernment here, not suspicion, but clarity. You sense when to move and when to wait, when to speak and when to remain silent, when something is God's invitation and when it's merely distraction dressed as opportunity. This discernment protects you. It keeps you from overextending, from proving, from burning out trying to be everything to everyone. You learn that saying no is sometimes the most faithful response. And in doing so, your yes gains power. People may notice the change in you now, not in a dramatic way, but in a grounded one. They may say you seem calmer, clearer, more focused, less reactive. You're no longer easily pulled into chaos or comparison. You operate from an internal reference point instead of external pressure. That reference point is identity. And identity produces authority. This is also where healing integrates fully, not just emotionally, but behaviorally. Old triggers lose their intensity. Old wounds stop dictating choices. You don't just understand your past, you've outgrown its control. You remember without reliving. You acknowledge without reopening. This doesn't mean pain never surfaces. It means pain no longer leads. You lead. God has restored order internally, and that order begins to manifest externally. Relationships stabilize. Decisions simplify. Life feels less cluttered. Not because you have fewer responsibilities, but because you carry them differently. Grace replaces urgency. Wisdom replaces impulse. Peace replaces performance. And in this place, confidence becomes quiet. You don't announce what God is doing. You don't over-explain your growth. You don't defend your path. You walk it. This is the authority Jesus carried, the kind that didn't argue with skeptics but stood firm in truth, the kind that didn't demand belief, but embodied it so fully that belief followed naturally. You are learning that same posture, not to imitate Christ superficially, but to reflect Him authentically in your own assignment. This is also where courage deepens. Not reckless courage, but settled courage. The kind that allows you to stand alone if necessary, to obey even when misunderstood, to remain faithful even when outcomes are uncertain. You're no longer driven by fear of missing out. You're guided by fear of misalignment. That fear is holy. It keeps you aligned with heaven rather than applause. And now something important happens. You stop waiting for permission. Not in rebellion, but in confidence. You no longer need constant affirmation to move forward. You trust the training God has given you. You trust the discernment He's developed in you. You trust that obedience, even imperfect, is better than hesitation masked as wisdom. You move when led. You pause when checked. You rest when instructed. And rest becomes strategic, not lazy. Because you understand now, your worth is not measured by output. God doesn't value you for productivity. He values you for obedience. Everything else flows from that. This is the season where you begin to carry responsibility without heaviness, where leadership doesn't feel like pressure, but service, where calling doesn't feel like burden, but alignment. You're no longer becoming, you're embodying, and embodiment changes how heaven entrusts you with what comes next. Because now, when doors open, you won't rush. When influence grows, you won't inflate. When challenges arise, you won't crumble. You'll stand, grounded, clear, ready. What God activates next will not overwhelm you, because you are no longer operating from insecurity, but from identity. And identity rooted in Him cannot be shaken. This is not the climax, but it is confirmation. You are ready for the weight of what you prayed for, and heaven knows it. What happens next is quieter than you expected, but deeper than anything you've known. This is where life stops feeling like a series of tests and starts feeling like a trust. Not because difficulty disappears, but because you are no longer questioning whether you can carry what comes. You already know you can. God has proven it to you through survival, through refinement, through seasons where nothing made sense except obedience. Now, instead of asking, "Am I ready?" you realize readiness was never about perfection. It was about faithfulness. This is the stage where legacy begins. Not someday, not at the end of your life, but now. Legacy is not something you leave behind later. It's something you release continuously through how you live, how you love, how you choose truth when no one is watching. Your impact is already active. Every time you respond with grace instead of defensiveness. Every time you choose integrity over convenience. Every time you remain steady when chaos invites reaction. These moments ripple further than you can see. You may never fully know how many people were strengthened simply by observing your consistency. How many prayers were answered because you stayed faithful when it would have been easier to quit? How many hearts found courage because your life silently testified that God restores what pressure tries to destroy? This is the hidden power of a life aligned with heaven. You are not meant to be loud to be effective. Some assignments are fulfilled in public. Others are fulfilled through presence, through being a living example of what happens when surrender meets obedience. And make no mistake, your obedience mattered. God does not overlook the quiet years. He does not dismiss the unseen faith. He does not forget the prayers whispered when words felt heavy. Scripture tells us that God is not unjust to forget the work and love shown in His name. That means nothing you carried faithfully was wasted. Nothing you endured with trust went unnoticed. This final season is not about striving to prove something. It's about standing firmly in what has already been established. You may notice that your desires are different now. Less frantic, less performative. You want depth more than attention, substance more than speed, fruit that lasts, not applause that fades. That shift is holy. It means your heart is aligned with eternity rather than urgency. And from that alignment, God releases influence that is sustainable. You won't burn out trying to maintain an image. You won't collapse under expectations you didn't create. You won't compromise truth for acceptance. Because you are no longer living for approval. You are living from conviction. This is also where peace becomes non-negotiable. You protect it. You prioritize it. You guard it. Not selfishly, but wisely. You understand now that peace is not passive. It's the atmosphere where discernment thrives. Without peace, clarity fractures. Without peace, purpose becomes distorted. So you choose environments carefully. You listen more than you speak. You allow God to filter distractions you once tolerated. And that discernment keeps your path clean. As your life continues unfolding, you'll notice something else: confirmation begins to surround you. Not in dramatic signs, but in alignment. Conversations that echo prayers you never spoke out loud. Scripture that lands exactly where you needed it. Opportunities that arrive without forcing. This is how God reassures His own. Not with constant explanations, but with quiet precision. You don't need to rush ahead anymore. You're not behind. Timing has caught up with preparation. What once felt delayed was simply waiting for you to become stable enough to sustain it. And now, you are. This doesn't mean the journey ends here. It means it changes shape. You'll still grow. You'll still learn. You'll still be stretched. But you will not be shaken in the same way again. Because your identity is settled. You know who you are. You know who sent you. You know why you're here. And that knowing becomes your anchor when uncertainty surfaces. If there are moments ahead where doubt tries to re-enter, remember this doubt no longer defines you. It may visit, but it cannot rule. You've crossed a threshold where faith is no longer fragile. It's rooted. Rooted faith doesn't panic during storms. It draws nourishment from them. This is also where gratitude deepens, not superficial gratitude, but reverent recognition. You begin to see how every season, even the painful ones, carried purpose. How God was forming you long before He positioned you. Your story, once fragmented, now reads as intentional. Nothing missing, nothing wasted, nothing random. And as this settles, something sacred happens. You become a safe place for others. Not because you have all the answers, but because you carry presence without judgment. People feel heard around you. Seen, understood, not fixed, supported. This is ministry. Not always behind a pulpit, not always with a title, but always with impact. God entrusts people to those who won't use influence for ego, and He entrusts influence to those who have been emptied of the need to be seen. You have passed that test. So now you walk forward, not anxious, not rushed, not uncertain, but grounded, open-handed, available, trusting that what God initiates, He sustains. The future doesn't intimidate you anymore, because you're not walking into it alone, and you're not walking into it unprepared. You're walking into it aligned. If this message has resonated, if something within you feels confirmed rather than excited, pause for a moment. That sense of calm recognition is not emotional hype. It's agreement. Agreement between your spirit and truth. Let it settle. You don't need to announce it. You don't need to explain it. You don't need to rush ahead. Just keep walking faithfully. God will unfold the rest exactly when needed. You were never ordinary. You were never overlooked. You were never behind. You were being prepared. And now you're ready. Carry that quietly. Walk that faithfully. And trust that heaven is still guiding every step. This is not the end of the story. It's the beginning of a life fully lived, awake, aligned, and grounded in purpose.